Today on How It's Made. Fish decoys. We bet you're waiting with bated breath for this one. Film digitization. An interesting report from behind the scenes. Cylinder stoves. You'll definitely warm to this report. And concrete light poles. That's lampposts to you and me. But first, in countries where the climate is freezing, luring fish to a hole in an iced-over lake requires a sneaky approach. This handcrafted piece of art is the sprat to catch a mackerel. Often brightly coloured with bold patterns, the decoy attracts the attention of fish, almost certainly leading to a fatal attraction. Native North Americans were the first to use decoys to catch fish in the winter. European settlers followed their example, and centuries later, decoy makers carry on the tradition. At this workshop, the decoy starts with a plank of white cedar wood. It's a wood with dense fibres, so it won't expand when wet. The craftsman draws a basic fish shape on the wood. This one will resemble a herring. He carves out the shape with a bandsaw, producing the blank, which can now be transformed into the fish decoy. He cuts a narrow slot for attaching a metal tail fin and draws a centre line around the decoy blank. This serves as a reference point as he tapers the edges with a sharp knife. If he cuts too deep, he could spoil the carving, so he whittles carefully, removing just a little with each stroke of the knife. The goal is to round the sharp edges and soften the profile. He sands the entire surface of the decoy until it's perfectly smooth. Sanding also opens up the pores of the wood, allowing the paint to adhere properly. He carves a mouth and then cuts slits for the two sets of side fins. He now bores into the wood on both sides to create eye sockets. He takes an equal amount of two epoxy clay components and kneads the two together. This activates the ingredients, turning it into a putty-like adhesive. He presses some of the adhesive into each of the eye sockets. And the glass eyes fit into the epoxy-filled sockets. The fins come from a sheet of aluminium, one dorsal fin, two sets of side fins, and a large tail fin. He inserts the fins into the slots in the carving. He then drills holes in the wood on each side and presses nails into those holes using pliers. This secures the tail fin. The fins on the decoy are larger than on the real ones. This helps them sit in the water when weighted. He now carves a pocket for that weight in the decoy's belly. He inserts the front side fins so that they protrude slightly into the freshly carved pocket. He then scoops up some molten lead and pours it into the pocket. Once solidified, it acts as a weight so the decoy will sink, and it will also secure the two side fins. He applies epoxy to the lead, sealing it so it won't be exposed to the water. He coats the entire decoy with lacquer. This seals the wood against water, which would have caused the wood to swell and crack the final finish. Once the lacquer dries, the decoy is ready to take the plunge. He tests it to confirm that it sinks and that it sits level underwater and swims. Sometimes more lead needs to be added, but in this case, the decoy takes to it like a fish to water. He marks a spot for the screw eye, which will take the fishing line, and then twists the screw eye into that spot. He paints the herring decoy a vibrant red, a colour that isn't strictly accurate, but one that should excite real fish. Decoys often aren't exact copies of fish, they're designed to simply pique their curiosity. Since fish are attracted by colours and shapes they don't normally see, decoy artists can be as creative as they like. They're actually considered a form of folk art, and there are even competitions for best examples. Just as well, really, because underwater, the fish won't realise it's just a red herring. Unless you're actually in a cinema, you're probably looking at a digital version of a film. Anything shot on film has to be digitised for it to be put on a disc, or drive, or downloaded from the internet. As a process, digitisation also preserves the feature, as film physically deteriorates over time. A film has to be in a digital format to be viewed from a DVD, or as a downloaded file on a computer, or a smartphone, or a tablet. This organisation has produced 13,000 films since it was founded in 1939. And now it's in the process of digitising that collection, as well as the 80 to 100 new films it produces each year. Once all the finished films are digitised, the next step will be to digitise stock shots and archival footage. The Film Board's archives contain many films which have deteriorated due to age and poor storage conditions, such as exposure to cold or to heat and excess humidity, which causes fungus growth. Film's other enemy, a damaging chemical reaction which occurs over time between the acid in the film plastic and the coloured dyes that make up the image. The first step is to repair any breaks in the film, so technicians can view and evaluate its condition. They do this using a simple device, called a splicer. They lay each broken end into the splicer's track and cut off the severed frame. A missing frame here or there isn't noticeable. Once the broken frame is removed, they lay both ends in the track, centering the meeting point. They then tape the splice on both sides. This tape is specially made for film splicing. Its chemical makeup won't damage the film over time, as would ordinary adhesive tape. The splicer punches sprocket holes in the tape, so that the portion like the rest of the film will thread onto the sprockets of the projector reel. Technicians evaluate all the existing versions of the film, right from the original to the screening prints produced for cinemas. They assess the general condition, note where the splices are and which frames are damaged. They then decide which version is in the best shape overall. And that's the version they digitise. Later they'll remove the damaged portions in the edit suite and replace them with identical but undamaged frames digitised from another copy. After threading the film through the scanner, they close the gate to hold the film flat to the scanning camera. Then they input the picture quality specifications, and the process begins. The scanner gently loops the film around its spools and begins rolling it past the camera. For the picture quality they've selected for this digitisation, the camera shoots 3 pictures of every frame. The scanner's control station displays what's being scanned in real time, along with all the technical parameters. This digitisation process itemises every single frame, so when they digitally replace a damaged portion from another copy, they can match everything up to the exact frames. The final step is colour correction. Because the digitised film is often pieced together from more than one film original, there are usually colour variations. For example, the character's blue jacket will be a different shade of blue at different times. At this station, the technician manipulates the colours to render them uniform throughout the film. After all, film has a very different colour and texture than video. And even though the digitised film will play on a video device, it must remain artistically and historically faithful to the film original. And that is a wrap. Coming up, we think this is the highlight of the show. We're off to see how lampposts are made. And we're also going to furnish you with some interesting details. We go to a factory that turns out cylinder stoves. See you after the break. A cylinder stove is designed for campers who like their home comforts. Just pitch the tent and set up the stove inside. It should keep things warm and toasty for most of the night. It also has a cooking surface and a tank to provide hot water so you can do all the washing up. Assuming you've brought the kitchen sink, of course. No need to huddle around a campfire to stay warm. A cylinder stove can take the chill out of Mother Nature. The cylindrical shape means it can take the heat. It will expand and contract with the temperature change and still maintain its original shape. The cylindrical firebox starts with a flat sheet of steel. A worker repeatedly feeds it through a roller until it reaches the desired shape. Then a plasma cutter cuts an opening for the stove door in another sheet of steel, following a pattern overhead. The plasma cutter works by sending an electric arc through compressed air, and the result is a clean cut. He now places the stove body on the door framework and clamps the assembly in a special jig to secure it as he welds the two parts together. He then places the backplate on the workbench and positions the other end of the cylinder on it. He clamps them and welds them together. Using the plasma cutter, he trims the front and back of the stove. From 3 flat sheets of steel to a cylindrical firebox, the process has taken less than 10 minutes. The welder now reinforces the underside of the stove top with several braces arranged in a grid pattern. This extensive bracing will prevent warping to keep the stove top perfectly flat under the intense heat of the wood fire below. This is the stove top before and after bracing. After cutting a hole for the stove pipe, he inserts a piece of pipe temporarily so that he can install a stovepipe collar. Once the collar is solidly attached to the cooktop, he removes the stovepipe. He then bends the rim of the collar in 4 places, creating tabs to keep the stovepipe from sliding into the firebox. He's now ready to join the cylindrical firebox to the stove top. He locks them in position and welds the entire assembly. This final weld seam seals the stove for an airtight and long-lasting burn. Next, he positions leg fittings on the belly of the stove. And then begins to weld them in place. Then it's back to the plasma cutter. It cuts damper holes in the stove door. Damper holes are used to regulate the flow of air to the fire. They also install a baffle plate on the back of the stove door to keep sparks from flying out into the tent. The stove door is then attached with a hinge. He tests it to confirm that it opens and closes easily. A colleague now rolls pipe for the chimney. Galvanized steel is used because it doesn't rust. He interlocks the seam and flattens it. He crimps the ends to connect the pipe to the other pieces of pipe. There are 5 pieces of stovepipe in all, and they can be stacked together for easy transport. With the latch now attached to the stove door, he sprays black stove paint onto the cylindrical firebox. This prevents rusting. Finally, he rivets a brass manufacturer's tag onto the stove front. Now it's time to pack it up. From the grate, to the water tank, to the stovepipe, everything can be stowed inside the firebox, making it completely portable. Assembly in the tent should take about 5 minutes. The biggest cylinder stoves are designed to hold a fire for an entire night. And with the proper setup, everyone should sleep safe and sound. A piece of heat-resistant rubber protects the tent around the stovepipe. A quick cup of tea and it's time to bed down for the night. Sleep tight, happy campers. And don't let the bedbugs bite. Or the bears, for that matter. Spun concrete light poles tower above our towns and cities, lighting the way. They're actually hollow structures with wiring or cable snaked through the cores. The concrete walls are reinforced by steel, yet these poles or lampposts are flexible enough to bend with the wind and snap back. When it comes to lampposts, the higher the light, the greater the area illuminated. Some concrete lampposts are over 10 metres high. Workers start with the tenon, the part of the pole framework that anchors the light fixture. They place 2 in a mould because they're making 2 lampposts at once. A worker strings 4 thick steel strands from one end of the long mould to the other, threading them through the tenons and through spiral wire. This establishes the basic framework. A colleague installs zinc boxes for electrical connections. He caps it with a block of rigid foam to protect it when the concrete is poured. The next worker attaches a stress gun to chocks that secure the steel strands. The gun pulls the strands one by one to a specific tension, and they stretch like rubber bands. They'll be pulled even tighter later on. Every metre or so, he attaches stay rings for extra rigidity. He ties them in place with plastic-coated wire. The spiral wire is then stretched around the steel strands and tenons to form the skeleton of the lamppost. The spiral wire will also stop the post from twisting too much in high winds. A crane transfers the long and heavy mould over to the next station and lowers it onto several stands. A hopper now swings into action. It's a travelling concrete dispenser. As it moves on a track, it funnels a special mix of concrete into the mould. The concrete has been made to order, with the customer specifying the colour and strength. The concrete also has a low moisture content. This makes it the consistency of clay and therefore malleable. As the concrete is dispensed, workers pack it around the lamppost steel skeleton. They scoop up overflow and smooth the surface of the wet concrete. One worker then cleans up the outer flanges and applies a non-stick liquid. A crane moves the top half of the mould into position and lowers it onto the concrete-filled bottom part. The team bolts the 2 parts of the mould tightly together using pneumatic impact tools. They now pull the steel strands to their final tension, stretching them so tightly that they compress the concrete once it hardens. Concrete is much stronger when it's being compressed. The mould is now ready for the spinning machine. It's essentially a series of train wheels. A crane lowers the mould's running rings into the grooves of the wheels, and then it's time for a spin. The wheels turn at 500 RPM, and the centrifugal force causes the concrete to migrate to the outer wall of the mould. The result is a hollow pole with a dense concrete wall. Transferred to a kiln, the concrete steam cures in the mould for about 5 hours. The concrete lampposts are ready for the big reveal. They open the mould and roll them out. At this point, the two posts are still attached. They examine them for flaws and then they'll separate them. All they need now is some buffing up. Here they polish a different octagonal post to expose the pigments in the concrete. The different coloured aggregates in this particular cement mix give the post a mottled, marbled look. An identification tag has also been moulded into the cement with the manufacturing date and the post's height and mass. They test just how far they can take it to confirm the post meets industry standards. They spray an acrylic finish onto some lampposts, making it easy for graffiti to be removed. Even though it only takes about 5.5 hours to make a concrete lamppost, now you know how it's made, I'm sure you'll look at them in a new light.